What if escaping your husband meant escaping death itself? Lydia Mallister learned the answer on the hottest Sunday the town of Redemption had ever seen. Lydia had once believed she had married salvation. Reverend Silas Mallister had come into her quiet Pennsylvania life like a storm of certainty, a man whose voice could shake rafters and coax tears from stone. When he asked her to be his wife, she thought purpose had finally found her. But 5 years in the raw West had shown her the truth. Silas didn't want a partner. He wanted a shadow who proved his light. Every Sunday she stood just inside the vestry door, watching him work his magic. The church was a plain wooden box, filled with the smell of pine, dust, and the sweat of tired ranch families. Sunlight cut through the windows in bright shafts, lighting up the faces turned toward Silas like he was some kind of prophet. The congregation saw a shepherd. Lydia saw the gears behind the performance. The pauses made for dramatic effect. The slow, sweeping gaze meant to break down the last bit of resistance in whatever soul he had chosen to save that week. Behind closed doors, the performance didn't stop. Only the audience changed. She lived under constant judgment, every word she spoke measured, every gesture corrected. Even their marriage bed felt like another sermon about her weakness. She lived smaller with every passing year, folded tighter, molded thinner, until she barely remembered the girl she used to be, the one who had run barefoot through Pennsylvania meadows with grass stains on her knees. Redemption's wild land was the only place she felt even a hint of breath. Through the kitchen window she saw endless sage, dusty hills rolling toward sharp mountains that cut the sky. Harsh, yes, but honest. That honesty made something inside her ache. Then came the Sunday everything shattered. The heat inside the church felt thick enough to drink. Silas was thundering against the sins of the flesh, spit flying as he paced behind the pulpit. Lydia felt lightheaded, steadying herself on the wall behind her. When he finally finished, and the congregation bowed their heads, a voice cut through the thick silence. "Reverend," Martha Gable said, rising to her feet, her face sharp with false piety. "Before we give thanks, there is a rot among us." The whole room shifted, a ripple of unease spreading like a wave. Silas frowned. "Sister Martha, what troubles you?" Martha raised a bony finger and pointed directly at Lydia. "Your wife," she said loudly. "I saw her behind the livery stable, whispering with young Jebediah from the choir, laughing with her head close to his. It was indecent." A shock went through the room. Every head turned. Lydia felt their stares hit her like thrown stones. "No," she whispered, "that is not." Silas moved so fast she didn't have time to breathe. His boots hit the floor like hammer blows as he stormed down from the pulpit. He grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, dragging her into the center of the church. "Is this true?" he roared, his voice the sharp, terrible sound she knew too well. "Did you disgrace me?" Quote, "I did nothing wrong," Lydia said, but her voice was too quiet for the watching crowd. "Do not lie to me in God's house." He shook her, a harsh, rattling jerk. Gasps rose from the benches, but no one stepped forward. No one defended her. They all watched, hungry for the fall of the preacher's perfect wife. That night, the church wasn't a sanctuary. It was a prison. Silas paced in front of her, his shadow huge against the lantern-lit walls, calling her a viper, a burden, a temptation sent to ruin his work. He bound her hands loosely, more for humiliation than restraint. Then he gave her an ultimatum. "You will be silent. You will confess nothing. And if you speak of this again, I will cast you out, alone in the wilderness. You will not last a day." He thought fear would keep her close. He was wrong. When she slipped into the night, hours later, her hands trembling as she packed a satchel with a knife, a change of clothes, and a few coins Sarah the widow had pressed into her palm, Lydia felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She moved through the shadows behind the parsonage, the town asleep under a moon, thin as a broken coin. The wild land waited just beyond the last cabin, a dark and dangerous freedom. She walked toward it. For the first mile, her legs shook with fear. By the third mile, her breath came rough but steady. By dawn, she was deep in country that cared nothing for preachers or lies or the shame of a congregation. 3 days she walked. 3 days she stumbled over rocks and tore her shoes, and whispered old prayers that felt hollow in her dry mouth. By the 3rd night, she found a rocky overhang to crawl beneath. She curled into a tight ball, cold and starving, sleep slipping in and out like a restless ghost. Then she heard it, hoofbeats, slow, deliberate. Her heart seized. Silas had sent men to drag her back. A figure on horseback emerged into the moonlight, tall and broad-shouldered, a weary silhouette against the pale sky. He dismounted, unfolding a map with tired hands. As he turned, his gaze swept across the ground, straight to the faint trail of her footsteps. He knew she was there. "Anyone there?" he called softly. Lydia pressed herself into the rock, praying he would leave. For a moment it seemed he would. He mounted his horse again, but when the animal shifted, a pebble tumbled down the rock face beside her hiding place. He turned sharply. Their eyes met. A stranger, a hunted man, as ragged and lost as she felt. "Wait," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." And somehow, she believed him. Lydia Mallister didn't know what scared her more, the stranger's voice or the kindness in it. He stood beneath the rocky ledge, half in shadow, his hands open at his sides to show he carried no threat. The moonlight caught the edge of his face. Tired eyes, a week's worth of beard, a man used to hunger and hardship. "I said I'm not going to hurt you," he repeated softly. "But if you stay out here alone, you won't see another sunrise." For a long moment, Lydia said nothing. Her body was shaking from cold and fear, her lips cracked, her dress torn. When she finally managed to whisper, her voice broke on the words. "I'm not going back." The stranger nodded slowly. "Then don't. But you can't keep running blind, ma'am. Come on. I've got water and a fire not far from here." She hesitated, weighing his tone against the memories of her husband's voice. Commanding, cruel, wrapped in scripture. This man's voice held none of that. It was worn down, quiet, and real. Finally, she stepped into the pale light. He helped her mount his horse, a patient bay gelding with kind eyes. His hands were strong but careful when he lifted her into the saddle. She felt the heat of his body behind her as he climbed up, his arm a steady wall of strength as they rode through the sleeping land. They didn't speak until they reached a small cabin tucked among tall pines. Smoke curled faintly from a stone chimney. The air was colder here, the stars sharp as glass. Inside, the place was sparse but warm. A fire crackled low, a single bedroll, a table, a rifle leaning against the wall. "Sit by the fire," he said, hanging his hat on a peg. "You look about ready to fall over." He poured her a tin cup of warm water, and when she drank, it felt like life returning to her veins. He handed her a strip of dried meat and a small biscuit. She ate in silence, too empty to care about manners. When she finally looked up, he was kneeling beside her, cleaning a scrape on her hand with a damp cloth. His touch was steady, practical, not ownership, just care. "I'm Cal," he said simply. "Cal Raines." "Lydia," she whispered. "Lydia Mallister." He gave a short nod, as if he already knew the weight of the name. "You're running from him, aren't you?" She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. Cal stared into the fire, jaw tight. "Men like that don't stop easy. He'll send someone." Her heart dropped. "You think he'll come?" "I know he will." He poked at the fire, sparks drifting up the chimney. "A man who builds his life on pride can't stand to lose what he thinks is his." She turned away from the flames, shame creeping up her neck. "Then I've put you in danger." He shook his head. "I've been in danger most of my life." He looked up at her, his eyes steady. "You just rest. We'll figure the rest tomorrow." Quote, that night, she lay on his bedroll near the fire while Cal sat in the corner with his rifle across his knees, keeping watch. When she woke once before dawn, she saw his eyes still open, the firelight catching a faraway sadness in them. He was a man carrying his own ghosts. Days passed. Lydia's strength returned slowly, piece by piece. Cal taught her to build a fire, to carve kindling, to draw water from the spring. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried the plain weight of truth. She found herself listening for his voice, the way he'd say her name softly, as if testing its strength. One afternoon he said, "You'll need to learn to ride proper." She looked up from where she was mending her torn skirt. "Ride? If we have to move quick, I can't be dragging you behind me." His tone was half teasing, half serious. "Come on." He led his horse Pilgrim into the clearing and showed her how to climb up. She was stiff with fear, gripping the saddle so tight her knuckles went white. Cal stepped close, one hand on her back. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Feel his rhythm. Don't fight him." She did, and slowly her body began to move with the horse. The fear eased. The mountains spread before her in gold light, endless and wild. For a heartbeat, she felt weightless, free. When she glanced down, Cal was watching her with a small, unguarded smile, the first she had seen on his face. That evening, they sat by the fire in companionable silence. Lydia felt something inside her, shifting, softening. She didn't know what to call it yet, but it was alive, like the embers glowing beneath the logs. The peace didn't last. The next morning, Cal's face changed when he saw the ground outside. "Tracks," he muttered, "fresh ones." Her heart lurched. "They found us." He crouched, studying the prints. "Maybe one man, maybe two. They've been watching." Her stomach turned to stone. "Silas?" "Could be," he said grimly. "Could be worse." He moved with purpose then, checking his rifle, packing supplies. "We leave now, higher into the peaks. It'll slow them down." Lydia nodded, but something inside her hardened. "No," she said softly. "I won't run forever." Cal looked at her, eyes narrowing. "You'll run if I tell you to." "I've done enough obeying," she said. "I'm done being afraid." He stared at her for a long time, then gave a small, reluctant nod. "Your trouble," he murmured. Sweet, stubborn trouble. They packed in silence, tension heavy in the air. As they stepped out into the gray morning, snowflakes began to fall, soft and silent. By midday, they found a narrow ravine where they could hide from the wind. The forest around them was still, except for the faint echo of a breaking branch somewhere below. "They're close," Cal whispered. They crouched behind a fallen pine, hearts pounding. Lydia's foot slipped in the mud, her balance giving way. She tumbled hard down the slope, landing in a patch of half-frozen dirt with a sharp cry. Her skirt snagged on a branch, ripping wide open, pulling her underthings down with it. Cal was beside her in an instant, his pistol drawn, then froze. She sat stunned in the dirt, her face flushed, her clothes torn, and her pride gone. Cal's voice came out in a hoarse whisper. She dropped her drawers in the dust. His hand shook once, then he let out a ragged breath. "Sweet Jesus," he said under his breath, half in disbelief, half in awe. "Your trouble." Lydia glared at him through her mortification. "A rock was slippery," she hissed. "That's all." He bit back a smile, shaking his head, and offered his hand. "Come on, Trouble. We've got worse things than rocks to worry about." He pulled her up just as the faint glint of metal flashed through the trees below. A rifle barrel. A watcher. "They're here," Cal said quietly. His tone was calm, but his eyes had gone hard. "Get ready." The wilderness had tested her before. Now it would make her prove what she had become. The moment Cal whispered, "They're here," the mountain seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind stopped moving through the pines. Lydia's pulse hammered in her ears as she crouched low behind the fallen tree, clutching the small pistol Cal had pressed into her hand. "Keep your head down," he murmured. "And if you see anything move, you tell me first. You don't shoot unless I say." His voice was low, calm, steady, the same tone he used when teaching her to build a fire or snare a rabbit. But beneath that calm ran a current of tension sharp enough to cut steel. They waited, listening. For a long time there was only the faint drip of melting snow. Then a twig snapped. A careless sound, too heavy to be an animal. Cal's jaw tightened. "Two of them," he breathed. One coming up the slope, one circling wide. He moved like a shadow, silent and sure. Lydia could only watch, frozen between fear and awe as he slipped away into the trees. She pressed her back against the cold bark, every muscle taut. The pistol felt heavy in her hand. The world had narrowed to sound, the distant creak of leather, the soft crunch of boots in snow. Then came the shot. A single thunderous crack rolled through the valley, followed by another in reply. Lydia's breath caught. She didn't know whose gun had fired first, or who had fallen. She rose just enough to peer over the log. Heart in her throat. A figure burst through the brush, a bearded man in a buffalo coat, his rifle swinging toward her. She didn't think. Her finger pulled the trigger. The pistol kicked hard, the sound deafening. The man shouted and staggered back, clutching his arm. Cal appeared out of nowhere, his rifle barking once. The man dropped where he stood. "Lydia!" Cal's voice snapped through the chaos. "Move!" He grabbed her hand and pulled her uphill, their boots slipping in the wet snow. Her lungs burned, her heart a drumbeat of panic and adrenaline. They didn't stop until they reached the ridge, overlooking their cabin far below. Smoke, a thin, twisting line rising into the gray sky. "They found it," Lydia gasped. "They've been there." Cal's face was carved from stone. "Then we finish it." They moved down carefully, circling wide until the cabin came into view. The front door hung crooked, the inside ransacked. Snow drifted in through the broken window. Cal crouched beside the doorway, his eyes scanning for movement. He motioned her back, then slipped inside, gun first. Nothing. Only silence and ruin. "They've been and gone," he said grimly. "But they'll be back, probably at night." He closed the door, set the table against it, and crossed the room in 3 strides. "We hold here. This is our ground." Lydia stared at him. "Cal, there could be more of them." "There are," he said simply, "but they don't know this place like I do." He began preparing with an efficiency that sent chills through her. Ammunition laid out in rows, the shutters barred. A string of tin cans stretched outside the door as a crude alarm. When he was done, he handed her the pistol again. "I promised I'd teach you," he said, voice quiet but intense. "Lesson starts now." Her hands shook. "Cal, You don't have to hit what you aim at," he interrupted gently. "You just have to make them think you will." He guided her fingers around the grip, adjusting her stance, his hands warm and steady on hers. The closeness made her heartbeat stumble, but his tone stayed firm. "You hold this," he said softly. "You hold your life." Night fell heavy and black, the kind of dark that seemed to swallow the world. The storm came with it, a roaring wind that shook the walls and buried the trail in drifting snow. For a few precious hours, they were hidden by nature's wrath. Then came the voice. "Lydia!" It was deep and familiar, carrying even through the howling storm. "My dear wife, come out now, and this can end with mercy." Lydia froze. Her blood turned cold. Silas. Cal moved to the window, his rifle raised. "Don't answer," he whispered. "He wants you scared." But the voice came again, dripping with false tenderness. "That man in there is a sinner. He'll see you hang, woman." "I'm the only one who can save your soul." Lydia's trembling hands tightened on the pistol. She thought of every bruise, every cruel sermon whispered against her skin. She thought of Sarah's gentle courage, of Cal's quiet kindness, of the nights under the stars when she'd started to believe in herself again. And something inside her broke free. When Silas shouted again, she didn't flinch. She walked to the door and stood beside Cal. "They're coming," he said. The wind carried faint voices. Men spreading out in the trees, the scrape of boots on frozen ground, the metallic whisper of rifles being loaded. Cal braced the door. "Stay behind me." The first blow hit, hard, splintering wood. Another followed, then a third. Cal fired once, a deafening crack that made the walls tremble. A scream answered from outside. Then the world exploded in noise. Bullets punched through the walls. Glass shattered. Smoke filled the air. Cal fired, reloaded, fired again. Lydia crouched low, her ears ringing, her heart pounding. She saw movement at the window, a shadow, a muzzle flash. Without thinking, she raised the pistol and fired. The figure fell back with a cry. "Good!" Cal gritted out between shots. "Again if you have to." A final blast tore through the wall, and Cal's body jerked. He dropped to one knee, clutching his shoulder, blood blooming dark through his shirt. "Cal!" Lydia dragged him down behind the table. His breath came ragged, his face pale. "You're hit." He managed a grim smile. "I've had worse." Outside, the gunfire stopped. Silence crept back in, broken only by the storm. Lydia peeked through the shattered window. A single man still stood, Silas. His hat was gone, his hair plastered to his skull by snow. His eyes blazed with madness. "Lydia!" he roared. "You think you can kill your own husband and walk free? You'll burn in hell for this." Lydia rose slowly. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with soot and blood. The pistol hung steady in her hand. She stepped into the doorway, the wind tearing at her hair. "You already made me live in hell," she said evenly. "I'm done burning." Silas froze. The strength of her voice seemed to take the air from his lungs. For a moment, he saw not his meek wife, but something forged from the wilderness itself, a woman he could never cage again. He took one step back, slipped on the ice, and stumbled away into the trees. The snow swallowed him whole. Lydia turned back to Cal, who was slumped against the wall, breathing shallow but alive. She dropped beside him, pressing her hands to the wound. "You saved me," he rasped. "You saved me first," she said, tears cutting clean lines down her dirty cheeks. They sat together in the wrecked cabin, hands clasped, the fire dying to embers. Outside, the wind eased, and the sky began to pale with the coming dawn. The storm was passing. When sunlight finally touched the mountains, Lydia stepped outside. The snow glittered pure and white, covering all trace of blood, all trace of the men who had come to destroy her. She turned her face to the rising sun and let its warmth wash over her. For the first time in her life, Lydia Mallister was free. Behind her, Cal's voice, weak but full of quiet awe, drifted through the broken doorway. "Your trouble," he said. "Sweet Jesus, the sweetest trouble I ever met." She smiled, the kind of smile that comes only after surviving the fire. And in that smile was the promise of a new beginning, built not from fear, but from freedom.